American John Edward Howard Rulloff was a career criminal and serial killer, as well as a doctor, lawyer, schoolmaster, photographer, inventor, carpet designer, phrenologist, and philologist. He died on May 18, 1871. The title of his biography from 1871, The Man of Two Lives, reflected this duality. The phrase, the genius killer, was another moniker for him. Rulloff was born to Danish immigrants near St. John, New Brunswick. Willem Rulloffson, a photographer, was his sibling. Both of Rulloff's lives began too soon. He worked for a law firm and spent 2 years in prison for embezzlement before he turned 20. In 1842, he relocated to Dresden, in upstate New York, where he taught school and studied botanical medicine with Dr. Henry W. Bull. Rulloff married Bull's 17-year-old cousin, Harriet Schutt, on the spur of the moment the following year, despite the disapproval of Schutt's family, who saw him as beneath their station, and who he had never even formally courted. Harriet gave birth to their daughter Priscilla after the family relocated to Lansing, New York. Rulloff urged his wife to relocate to Ohio, where he intended to pursue a career as an attorney or professor, so that the couple could be further away from her relatives. On June 22, 1844, after Harriet refused and threatened to return to her family with their daughter, Rulloff accused her of having an affair with Bull, fatally struck her on the head with a pestle, and then poisoned his daughter. Despite Rulloff's best efforts, he was unable to carry out his suicide plan. The next day, he pretended to return a wooden chest to his uncle in order to borrow a horse and wagon from his neighbors, the Andersons. The Andersons also observed Rulloff load a half-full sack or pillowcase into the wagon before he set off in the opposite direction from where he had said he was going, toward Cayuga Lake. Rulloff came back to Mrs. Anderson's house with the chest still in tow, explaining that he and his wife would be gone for 2 weeks. There were rumors that Rulloff murdered his wife, but he eventually returned. He denied any involvement in the murder when questioned by the Schutts, saying instead that his wife had left him and that he and her had relocated to Ohio. The discovery of Harriet's clothing and other personal items inside the house cast doubt on both accounts, leading to the conclusion that she had not left voluntarily. The second time Rulloff tried to run away, his brother-in-law Ephraim Schutt was on his trail, and eventually they caught up with him and brought him to Ithaca to face murder charges. There were attempts to dredge Cayuga Lake to retrieve the bodies, but no luck. Due to the lack of physical evidence, the grand jury declined to indict Rulloff for murder, and instead charged him with kidnapping his wife. At his trial in 1846, Rulloff represented himself and argued that there was no proof of wrongdoing. Nonetheless, a jury found him guilty, and he was given a 10-year sentence that included mandatory hard labor at Auburn Prison. After teaching himself philology in prison, Rulloff developed a theory about language evolution that he planned to publish as the great secret in philology. It got to the point where he could hold classes in his cell. His plans to enter the field were dashed, however, when he learned that Tompkins County would immediately file murder charges against him for the death of his wife upon his release from prison. From behind bars, Rulloff filed a claim of double jeopardy and began a legal battle. The murder charge against Harriet Rulloff was dropped, but a new murder charge against Priscilla was filed. In 1858, Rulloff was also found guilty of this crime, but he managed to avoid capture by fleeing the country. In all likelihood, Rulloff's escape was aided by either Albert Jarvis Jr., the son of Ithaca's undersheriff, whom Rulloff had tutored in Greek and Latin and who would later become his partner in crime, or by Jarvis' mother, Jane, who had also befriended Rulloff and publicly manifested her disbelief in his being a murderer. Any way you slice it, Rulloff headed westward on foot. After losing 2 toes to frostbite, he survived on a diet of wild nuts and food stolen from farms. When he got to Meadville, Pennsylvania, he met a local inventor named A.B. Richmond under the guise of James Nelson, and managed to convince him to start a business partnership by demonstrating his expertise in fields as disparate as conchology, mineralogy, forensic anthropology, and entomology. After making a similar impression at what is now Washington and Jefferson College in southwestern Pennsylvania, where Rulloff was set to begin his teaching career, Jarvis contacted him by letter to inform him that he and his mother had recently become destitute. Before he could return to Ithaca with the bounty money for the Jarvis family, Rulloff was apprehended during a jewelry store heist and sent back to jail. Despite being a murderer, a fugitive, and a robber, Rulloff successfully appealed his murder conviction, was exonerated, and was released when prosecutors dropped the other charges against him. With Jarvis's help, Rulloff relocated to New York City, where the two stayed alive by committing burglaries. In 1861, Rulloff was taken into custody and given a sentence of 2.5 years in Sing Sing. There he hooked up with William T. Dexter, his second accomplice. After hearing about the upcoming 1869 convention of the American Philological Association in Poughkeepsie, Rulloff mailed a manuscript outlining his theory in language evolution under the title Method in the Formation of Language. He announced his plans to auction off the manuscript under the guise of Professor Laureau and set the bidding at $500,000. Even though Rulloff was convinced that his research would completely change the industry, the association ultimately rejected it, and not a single member of the association placed a bid on the manuscript. Next, in 1870, in Binghamton, New York, Rulloff, Jarvis, and Dexter plotted to rob a dry goods store while the two live-in clerks, Frederick Merrick and Gilbert Burroughs, were asleep in the upstairs apartment. In an effort to put the workers to sleep, the three of them burned chloroform, but Jarvis's discovery of something woke them up. To begin, Merrick tried to shoot Rulloff with the gun he kept under his pillow, but the gun wouldn't fire. Then he picked up a stool and hurled it after Rulloff as he ran away. In the meantime, Burroughs had Dexter in his grasp and was mercilessly beating him. Jarvis and Rulloff came to Dexter's aid when Merrick teamed up with Burroughs, and Rulloff shot a warning shot into the air. While Burroughs halted, Merrick lunged for Jarvis. After Merrick ignored a second warning shot, Rulloff pointed the gun at his head and fired, instantly killing him. The bandits made a chaotic break for it, missing the boat that was supposed to take them across the Chenango River. They then attempted to swim the river. Jarvis and Dexter, too tired to swim against the current, drowned, though after Rulloff's arrest, some suspected that he was responsible for their deaths. Early that morning, their bodies were found. A pair of leather boots, with a telltale depression where Rulloff's missing toes would have been, were all that remained of him after he made it across. Since Burroughs had tipped off the Binghamton police, extra patrols have been set up and suspicious-looking men have been rounded up. Rulloff became a prime suspect the following morning after he fled the local train station without presenting identification, and instead hid in an outhouse at a nearby farm. Initially introducing himself as Charles Augustus, Rulloff changed his name to George Williams later on. He was presented with the exhibited bodies of Dexter and Jarvis, but he still claimed not to recognize them. But another onlooker, Judge Ransom Balcom, recognized Rulloff and spoke up, saying, "I know that's Rulloff. Edward H. Rulloff, you have been identified. You killed your family in Lansing in 1845. After addressing the law enforcement, he said, "This man understands his rights better than you do, and will defend them to the last." Investigators tracked down Rulloff, who used a fictitious name, Edward C. Howard, to a Brooklyn apartment after discovering paperwork at the scenes of the murders of Dexter and Jarvis. On January 4, 1871, Rulloff's trial formally got underway. The phenomenon drew in an average of 2,000 people per day. Despite his guilt, some people, like Horace Greeley, director of the New York Tribune, felt that a man with Rulloff's obvious intellectual prowess should be spared the death penalty. After leading his own defense once more, Rulloff refused to plead insanity, and instead asked Governor John T. Hoffman to pardon him or postpone his execution until his theory on language evolution was complete. He claimed he would then be ready to die. In a letter to the Tribune, Mark Twain satirized the clemency petitions for Rulloff by offering to have another man confess to the crime in Rulloff's place. The jury found Rulloff guilty on March 3, and he was given a death sentence by hanging that same day. On death row, He admitted to killing his wife and gave a detailed account of the crime, but he denied killing his daughter. Some people began to assume that he had not killed her, but rather had sent her to live with relatives under an assumed name. The public hanging of Rulloff on May 18, 1871, was not the last one in the state of New York. His supposed final words from his gallows speech, according to some accounts, were "Get going already. I hope I can get to hell before they serve dinner." One report claims that all he said was, "I can't stand still." After his execution, Rulloff's brain was transported to Cornell University, where a professor named Bert Wilder determined it to be the largest human brain ever found at that time. The volume of Rulloff's brain is said to be 1,673 cubic centimeters, making it the second largest brain ever recorded. The Cornell University Psychology Department in Ithaca, New York houses the Wilder Brain Collection, where you can view it.